They said it was final. That everything was over for Pastor Donnie McClurkin. A sentence had already been declared, at least that's what people believed. But here's the problem. There was never an official ending. Instead, what followed was something far more disturbing. Lawsuits, old accusations, and a life story suddenly turning into chaos in public view. And just when people thought it couldn't get worse, another claim surfaced that changed everything again. Before we continue, here is a gentle reminder for you to please support this channel by clicking the subscribe button and hitting the bell. Let's continue. So what really happened to the man once called a gospel legend? And why is everyone talking about a final goodbye that may not even be real? Before the fame, before the stage, before the world knew his name, Donnie McClurkin's story began in a place filled with pain most people never saw. He grew up in Copiag, but what shaped him wasn't the location, it was what happened inside his home. A tragedy struck early. His younger brother was killed in a road accident at just 2 years old. A moment like that doesn't just pass, it lingers. It changes everything inside a family. And after that, things didn't get easier. The grief spread through the household. Tension grew. Silence became normal. And the emotional weight of that loss stayed in the background of his childhood. But there was something even more difficult that came later, something he would only speak about years after becoming famous. He described experiencing abuse during his early years, moments that left deep emotional scars and confusion that followed him into adulthood. And here's where the story takes a turn most people don't expect. Because instead of breaking completely, he started searching for something to hold on to.
With any of the stigmas that I had, Lord, keep me from crying.
Thank you,
my
Jesus.
children don't have to grow up with any of the struggles that I've had.
Yes,
my
Lord.
children are free
Yes,
and they are
Lord.
secured from the temptations
Yes, Lord.
that
Yes.
tempted me out of the way.
Church became that place. Music became that escape. Inside gospel spaces, he found structure, voices, and something that felt like safety when everything else felt unstable. But even then, the question remained. How does someone carry that kind of childhood pain, and still find a way to stand in front of the world? Because what came next didn't just change his life. It set him on a path towards something no one in his family could have predicted. At first, it wasn't fame. It wasn't stages or awards. It was just a voice, and a group of people trying to make sense of their sound. Donnie McClurkin formed a group called the McClurkin Singers. Then later, the New York Restoration Choir. They weren't famous yet. But something about the sound started to spread. By the late 1970s, they were already recording music. And slowly, doors began to open. But here's where things started to shift. Because this wasn't just music anymore. It was becoming a movement inside gospel circles. His voice carried something different, pain, honesty, and emotion that felt real. People didn't just listen, they felt it. And then came a major turning point. He entered ministry work under Marvin Winans at Perfecting Church in Detroit. A position that wasn't about fame, but formation. For over a decade, he worked under leadership, learning structure, discipline, and how gospel music and ministry could merge into something bigger. But even while building stability, something else was quietly building too. Recognition. A connection with a Warner Alliance executive eventually opened the door to his solo career. And in 1996, everything changed. His self-titled album was released. It didn't just introduce him. It announced him. Songs like Stand began spreading rapidly. Not just in churches, but on radio stations and beyond. And then came something unexpected. Public praise from Oprah Winfrey. That moment pushed his visibility even higher. But success like this always creates a new question. Because once the world knows your name this fast, what else starts coming with it behind the scenes? And for Donnie McClurkin, that question was about to become impossible to ignore. At the height of his growing success, something happened that changed the tone of his entire life story. Not music. Not fame. Not recognition. Something far more serious. He was diagnosed with leukemia. Doctors saw internal bleeding, swelling, and symptoms that needed immediate treatment. The situation was critical. For many people, this would have been the end of the story right there. But what happened next is where the narrative splits into two different interpretations. Medical urgency on one side. And unwavering faith on the other. Donnie McClurkin chose to hold on to belief rather than panic. He leaned into the same message he preached from the stage, faith under pressure. And somehow, he survived. But the story didn't stop there. Years later, another moment would shock people again. A serious car accident. Reports said he suddenly lost consciousness while driving, leading to a dangerous crash. For a moment, it looked like history might repeat itself in the worst possible way. But once again, he survived. And that's where public perception began to shift. Some called it resilience. Others called it something else entirely. Because when one person survives multiple near-death events, people start asking questions that don't have easy answers. Was it luck? Was it timing? Or something deeper? And just when it seemed like his story had already reached its most dramatic turning point, his personal life was about to open a completely different set of questions that the public wasn't ready for. As his voice grew louder on the world stage, his private life stayed much quieter. Almost too quiet. For someone known by millions, Donnie McClurkin kept his relationships tightly guarded. Very little was ever clear, and that silence created space for speculation. Then, in 2016, things shifted. Reports began linking him to gospel singer Nicole C. Mullen. At first, it looked like a simple public connection between two well-known voices in gospel music. They appeared together in interviews, sharing the screen and speaking openly about faith and life. But behind that public image, confusion began to grow. Some stories described a deeper relationship. Others denied it entirely. And then came the contradiction that made things even more unclear. Nicole later stated publicly that they were not married, pushing back against rumors that had already spread widely online. But years later, Donnie himself would add another layer of confusion during a televised interview, suggesting the situation had been misunderstood from the start. So now the question wasn't just about a relationship. It was about what the public actually knew for sure. And in stories like this, uncertainty spreads faster than truth. But that wasn't the only part of his personal life drawing attention. He is also a father. A son named Matthew, born in 2000, marked a new chapter in his life, responsibility, identity, and legacy beyond music. And he also adopted a young girl named Michelle, bringing her into his family at a very young age. On the surface, it looked like stability. But underneath, the contrast between public admiration and private mystery was becoming harder to ignore. And just when it seemed like his life had found balance again, the biggest spotlight of his career was about to arrive. By the time Donnie McClurkin entered full global recognition, he was no longer just a gospel singer. He had become a voice heard across churches, concerts, radio, and international stages. And it all traced back to one defining moment in 1996. His self-titled album didn't just perform well, it positioned him as a major force in gospel music. Songs like Stand didn't stay inside church walls. They crossed into mainstream spaces. People who didn't even follow gospel music still knew the message. And then came We Fall Down, a song that quietly became a staple in worship services across the world. But success like this doesn't just grow in one direction. It expands. He went on to win major recognition, including a Grammy Award for his work in traditional gospel. His albums continued charting, including live projects that reached wide audiences and stayed on Billboard lists for extended periods. Then came another turning point. Collaborations. In 2014, his duets project brought together major gospel names, Erica Campbell, Fred Hammond, John P. Key, Israel Houghton, and others. It wasn't just an album, it was a gathering of gospel influence in one place. And in 2016, the journey reached #1 on the Gospel Albums chart, proving his relevance had not faded. But even at the peak of success, something subtle began to shift underneath it all. Because the higher the platform became, the more attention followed every word, every statement, every belief. And that attention was not always supportive. It was becoming critical. And what started as admiration, was slowly beginning to turn into public division. But the real breaking point had not arrived yet. Not even close. At the same time his music was reaching global audiences, another part of his life was becoming impossible to ignore. Not his songs. Not his awards. But his words. In the early 2000s, Donnie McClurkin publicly spoke about his past struggles during an interview, linking them to his childhood experiences and personal development. For some, it was honesty. For others, it was controversy. And that single moment began a ripple effect that never fully disappeared. Over time, his public statements about sexuality and faith became a dividing line. Supporters stood by him, saying he was expressing his beliefs. Critics argued his comments were harmful and deeply offensive. And the tension only grew stronger. In 2008, his involvement in high-profile political campaign events created backlash, leading to public debate and eventual removal from some official performance listings. Even though he still appeared at certain events, the situation had already shifted public perception. But that was only one wave. In 2013, another major moment arrived when he was originally invited to a historic civil rights anniversary event, and later disinvited after renewed criticism. Each time the controversy resurfaced, the reaction was the same. Division. Then came a bigger turning point in public discourse when legal and social changes in the United States intensified debates around marriage equality. McClurkin again voiced his stance based on his religious beliefs, and once more, reactions split sharply across audiences. But even that wasn't the most serious challenge ahead. Because while public debate continued online and in churches, something far more personal was developing behind the scenes. Something that would take the story from controversy to legal confrontation. Just when it seemed like the story had already gone through every possible phase. A new development pushed everything into a different kind of spotlight. Not music. Not ministry. Not public debate. But legal action. In 2026, a former personal assistant filed a lawsuit in Manhattan Supreme Court against Donnie McClurkin. The claims included serious allegations tied to misconduct during private interactions over a span of years. According to the complaint, these incidents were said to have happened in different settings, work environments, travel situations, and private counseling moments connected to ministry work. The lawsuit also referenced an alleged message where an apology was reportedly made, which quickly became a focal point in online discussions. But here is where the story becomes even more divided. McClurkin's legal team strongly denied all allegations, calling them false and disputing the entire narrative presented in the filing. So now the public was left with two completely different versions of the same story. One side pointing to allegations and claims. The other side rejecting them completely. And once again, the internet reacted instantly. Supporters defended him, waiting for legal clarity. Critics questioned his past and public history. But nothing was resolved. No final ruling. No confirmed outcome. No clear ending. Just another chapter added to a story already filled with questions. And as the headlines continued to circulate, one phrase kept appearing again and again across social media. Is this the final goodbye? But the truth is, no one seems to know where this story actually ends, or what the next development will bring. Because sometimes, the most talked about endings are the ones that haven't happened yet.